Warning! This episode contains graphic language, imprisonment, torture, galba, fucking torics, and as always, teen angst. Also, there'll be spoilers for chapters 42 through 48 of Inheritance, Book 4 of the Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. Listen at your own risk.
Is this a podcast, or is this just fantasy? We're just two nerds and we love our fantasy. So join us if you want to nerd out. Time to start the podcast and see. Anyway, here's the show.
Hello, readers. I'm Dane Patterson, the host that also felt like he was in a situationship with someone who was torturing him with hot pokers before he met his wife. So I know that's a lot of feelings.
And I'm Jacqui Lanier, and is this a podcast, or is this just fantasy? The podcast where we cannot condone torture, but I will be damned if it isn't what our author du jour is best at writing. He's good at it.
He likes to write it. If 4 seasons into our unhinged podcasting experiment, you have yet to acquire some of our cool merch, you now have the opportunity to win some.
So true.
That's right. We're still talking about the giveaway.
Yes.
If you review us on Apple Podcast and send a screenshot to isthisjustfantasypod@gmail.com, you'll have a chance to win a bundle of fantasy-themed hats, totes, tumblers, and stickers.
Yes, and you can get a sneak peek at all that merch on our website at isthisjustfantasypod.com, and follow us on social media for our fire inheritance memes. We're on TikTok at isthisjustfantasypod and Instagram at justfantasypod.
It's all very exciting.
Super exciting. So before we do a tight hour on torture with a brief outer space interlude, I want to do a quick recap. This is just...
When you put it that way.
What's written for me. I want to do a quick recap of the wild end to the Battle of Drosleona that we covered last time. We kicked off the last episode in Saphira's POV as she leads the Vardens' assault on Drosleona, with the Sex Panther playing the role of Hullo Eragon in the confrontation with Thorn and Murtagh. Saphira's physical prowess gives her the upper hand as she buries the bigger dragon in rubble of the culty cathedral, which is just a great 2-for-1. Meanwhile, Roran is in the vanguard of the charge toward the city gates, while Eragon and world's most eclectic SEAL team ever.
Catchy Jacks. Like
Hey,
rolls
we
right
love
off
to
the
name
tongue.
things here. They sneak through Drosleona to open the gates from the inside. When they find a mass of Imperial soldiers and chunks of city walls standing between them and the rest of the Vardens' army, Eragon finally remembers to use Brahm's ring to get his own 2-for-1 deal, clearing the rest of the debris and injuring Thorn. Just a classic dragon wizard Nepo baby getting a stored energy leg up from his daddy Dane. Tale as old as time. It gets Murtagh and Thorn to turn tail with a barrage of threats, so the Varden has successfully captured Drosleona. The good vibes are sadly very short-lived because Eragon's post-battle errands include berating the cursed witch baby for avoiding the war and trying to stave off PTSD by doing a dead guy's hallucinogens with Arya. And you hate to see real life interrupt a good trip, but that's exactly what happens as Murtagh and Thorn attack the Vardens' camp in the middle of the night, kidnapping Niswada despite Arya, Saphira, and Eragon's Herculean effort to catch them with the Doth Dart.
Yeah.
So now we get to deal with the harsh realities of a power vacuum in a rebel alliance that's growing more tenuous by the second. The War Council convenes immediately to determine Queen President's successor, and things go south quickly when Dark Oren continues his tough look streak. But brother cousin Roran rallies everyone around Eragon as our interim King President of war operations for the time being. They're still planning to press on to confront Gal and Urobane. It's just that now they have the added pressure of rescuing Niswada when they get there because, you know, they needed just a little more.
It wasn't hard enough yet.
More stakes. Our sweet bean farmer is really feeling the existential weight of the literal fate of the free world on his shoulders when he remembers that thing that catboy told him that one time. You know the thing, where you can find a miracle solution when all hope is lost by finding a rock that nobody's ever heard of. That thing. He decides to do some digging about that whole thing with Solemn Bum, which leads to the revelation that the origin of the prophecy that will require the newly minted leader of the rebellion to take a quick side quest. That whole origin, dubious at best. And on top of that, nobody knows anything else about the Rock of Kuthian or Vault of Souls until Sullembum lapses into a convenient trance and points to the section in Jode's book that reveals the mystery rock is in the Riders' erstwhile island capital on Vrowengard. Eragon and Saphira know this all could be an elaborate trap, but their cause is doomed without some outside intervention, so they don't really feel like they have a choice here, which means it's prophetic detour time. After grappling once again with his true nemesis, public speaking, we left off with Eragon and Saphira hitting the road with Glader in tow to see what awaits them on Vrowengard. What's going to be in this vault, Dane?
It's like that Reddit post that everyone got so excited about, and then it was empty.
It's a trap.
It's a trap. Okay, now that we're officially in the back half of this season and book,
wild,
I want to do a rapid word association with you on some
Okay.
important characters
Okay.
in our story as the OG series wraps up.
Great.
All right, so just say the word that comes to mind
Okay.
when I am just realizing you have word associations for me.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Hey.
Oh, great.
Hey, don't look at those.
Oh, gosh.
That's cheating.
Oh, no. Okay, here we go.
Yes.
Bloodgarm.
Sex. Sexy.
Nope, she said sex.
Great.
Cut it, loop it. There
Great.
we go. Garrow.
Weird.
Elva.
Cursed.
Eldenari.
Trap.
Queen Islanzadi.
Wait, which one?
Queen Islanzadi.
Wild.
Marcus Tabor.
Insignificant.
Oh, that's doing our boy dirty.
Okay, like you said, I did prepare some for
Oh,
you.
no.
Look away, Dane. You're
Okay,
cheating.
I was
You're
cheating.
the worst.
I won't. Okay, I don't know what these are.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I can see how this is fun if you aren't the one under rapid fire pressure.
Oh, no.
So let's go with Angela.
I don't like her. I don't know.
That's not a word. One word.
Bad.
Karn.
Good. I'm simple.
Helen.
Hot.
Albrecht.
Ugh. I'm just gonna. Yeah.
Valdor.
Good. Am I simple?
No.
All of mine are just like good,
bad, don't
meh,
like.
meh.
Words are hard. I think that was all I thought of, unless I can pull another couple
Oh my
out
God.
of the woodwork, but
What?
that aren't written here.
Angela Karn. This was pointed. There's Albrecht in here.
Yeah.
All right. This
yeah.
was a setup.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to dwell too long on
Listen,
that.
if I'm going to do it, I'm going to be tricksy about it.
Yeah, you were. Just so everybody knows, we have like an outline, and like I put these in here a while ago. I knew she wouldn't look at it. She wouldn't cheat. She would never do that. No. And then she didn't put anything, and then just surprised me. Well, that's just fun. That's just good old
You're
fun.
welcome.
Jacqui.
And then you still try. You know why I didn't do it? Because you still tried
I did.
to cheat.
I tried to cheat.
You're the worst.
Well, we're not going to dwell on that. Chapter 42, The Torment of Uncertainty. We start this week with Nasawada's point of view, and I, for one, am all for it.
Yeah?
She's never let us down on these point of views.
Okay.
But unfortunately for our queen president, the vibes are not immaculate.
Oh, so true.
And things
So true.
are just not ideal.
Yes.
Nasawada is in a very well-constructed elven-designed room with fancy tiles and vaulted ceilings that she can only see because of a small glow from somewhere behind her.
Luxury. Like an aesthetic kind of a glow,
Oh,
Dane.
yeah. Like there's like a lamp with nice ambiance.
Yeah, like a Himalayan salt lamp somewhere in this room.
I think the vibes are much more like maybe that's dangerous behind her. You know?
Oh, sure.
She herself is in her shift on a cold stone slab and is manacled at the head, the wrist, and ankles.
It's not the kind of day spa I go to.
No, she freaks out a bit, thinking about her life and what she won't finish and the lack of her legacy.
Jesus.
Yeah, Nasawada doesn't freak out for too long, though, and basically gets back to what she does best.
Yes. Buck up, girl.
Yeah, using her mind.
Yes.
There are people who don't like Nasawada online because
No.
they think she's arrogant and extreme, but let's be real here. It's not arrogant if you actually are smarter than everyone.
I, for one, am horrified to learn that there are people online who don't like Naswada.
Oh, yeah.
Get over it, haters.
Yeah. Be God, haters.
She's incredible. That's
Well,
so rude.
It's not your time yet.
No.
I love her.
Yes.
Saphira should have chosen Nasawada
Oh,
as a
damn.
writer. Well, because the two of them would have had this whole evil, immortal, tyrant, wizard king problem like wrapped up in a week. Anyway,
So true.
she would have been like, you know what we could do? Alas, the former queen president is a little tied up at the moment. So she starts working on changing her identity so that she can withstand whatever enhanced interrogation techniques Dick Cheney, I'm sorry, I mean Galbatorix throws at her.
Nothing like a good Dick Cheney joke.
We
to
love
kick
Dick
us
Cheney
off.
jokes. Basically, she's going with the nuclear option because she knows no one is coming to save her.
Yes.
So she decides that everything that comes after this will be all a part of Gal's machinations, even if Eragon seems to break in and save her.
Okay.
It's kind of wild.
Yeah, her prep for this, I was like, ooh, somebody has like put you through like resisting torture course.
Like she's been in the CIA or something.
Yes, that was immediately the vibe.
Is that what you were thinking too? Yeah. Okay, Jax, all I could think of while she was locked up this whole time is how many times I would have to go to the bathroom. You know this about me. I drink so much water, and on the first day at least, I think I would just be a real nightmare situation. So what do you think?
Part of the torture.
Yeah. Do you think you'd be peeing on yourself in this situation?
Jesus
just
Christ.
between you and me. No one will know. Just privately, just a conversation amongst friends.
As long as I don't have to admit it to anybody else.
Yeah.
No, I would hold it like an adult.
I would be messy.
No,
for me.
sometimes when I'm working, like there'll just be long days because I'm on site at a wedding and I don't know how to effectively delegate. It's just a little bit about me. But I'll be there for like 14 hours, 16 hours, and like at the very end of the day, I'll realize that I've been to the bathroom like once just because I've been so busy. So like, I think I'd be fine.
We've written together. It's like every hour on the hour.
Yes. Oh, no, not you. You would not be fine.
I drink like
agree
80
with you there.
ounces of water, a cup of coffee, some protein shakes.
I notably have multiple beverages. You and Kevin had to convince me to take my third beverage off camera because that'd be weird.
It's so weird that you... Anyway, well, we're not going to go too deep on this. Well, now that we've whizzed past that topic, let's move on. Nasawada gets some excitement when a door slams open and someone walks towards her.
Ooh.
And it's our first fat male character who enters the scene,
Amazing.
and he's definitely not hot, Jax. This guy's head is bulbous and bald.
Oh, that's right.
He wheezes and he's sweaty with bad breath and bad teeth. And my first takeaway: the Empire healthcare system is not up to Varden executive level insurance standards.
So true. Their rich people healthcare is not the same here.
Yeah, this man needs an inhaler, and maybe he was like a baby that needed one of those helmets. Have you seen these helmet kids?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? The ones that like help you shave your skull.
Yes.
The helmet kids.
Do we call them the helmet
I think that's what they're called.
I don't know. I could see that, though. I feel like one of the things that really sticks with me from this guy is the way his head is described as gourd-like. And I was like, oh, no.
Yeah, Gal needs to step it up.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is our main gourd. I mean guard. I guess bringing her some food and water. He removes her restraints, and Nasua instantly goes feral, trying to beat him and bite him. Despite bleeding, he seems fucking immune to pain, or he has some impressive self-control because he has absolutely no reaction.
Yeah.
I think he has read... Do you think he's read Marcus Aurelius? And this is just a classic stoicism? He's just taking it in stride?
You think? Feels like a reach. Really feels like a reach for this character.
Yeah, this guy,
especially with the rest of his characterization.
especially the gourd head. I don't know. Nevertheless, I'm glad our girl went for it. She went all out. This chapter goes on to be quite gross. He takes her to the restroom, and Nasawada manages not to pee on herself, which, as we've covered, is very commendable. She then, you're in much like
you're very caught up in this.
I am. I would be in really dire straits. She's then fed like an infant while this dude ignores all her attempts to speak with him.
Yes.
He gives me the fucking creeps.
Yeah, dude.
Paolini really does give us the heebie-jeebies this whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nasawada. That.
Yeah, it's just so weird. Nasawada comes to the conclusion that her jailer is totally indifferent to her existence and seems inhumanly devoid of empathy. And from there, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to her starting to think about this fat dude's murder.
Jesus Christ.
As the time passes and Nasawada is essentially just lying around before the man returns to do the same thing, completely healed and showing no injury from his previous attack. This chapter ends with Nasawada observing this man's beautiful hands.
Oh, that's right.
And the nails that he had clearly cleaned, cut, and polished. And how this is a weakness she can exploit.
Yeah, I spend a long time on cuticle prep too before I do my at-home manicure, so I get it.
Yeah, but this goes on for no joke pages, and it's clearly supposed to demonstrate how
I was riveted.
Yeah, you were. When I wrote like some of this, you were like, "What are you talking about?" It's clearly supposed to demonstrate how she's actively trying to forget her life and the Varden, while also grasping at any plan for her escape.
Gotcha.
But it feels a bit like Paolini. might just be into hands, maybe. I don't know, which is fair. If you're into hands, good for you, dude.
This is his like Quentin Tarantino's feet.
Yeah, exactly.
That does take us to chapter 43, the Hall of the Soothsayer. This chapter starts, and we're still in torture land with sad former Queen President. Our favorite jailer is back, but this time his job seems more nefarious as he comes in with a little stove, not to cook anything fun. There's some hot irons poking out of it. But Niswata is surprised when instead of starting the torture, her grubby little guard just like lights the fire and walks out. She doesn't have long to wonder what this little twist presages because a group of people approach her door talking, and one large man in a black cape enters and sits in a chair. And after all this time, Dane, it's happening. Sound the horns. It's our just and rightful Emperor Galbatorix.
Galbatorix is on screen.
In the flesh, dude. I feel like this hits the same on the reread as it did the first time I read this. Like, Niswata is hyper aware of every micro movement Galbatorix is making. It really draws you in and builds his like ominous character really quickly. I was so tense. I was like, what the fuck is this guy gonna do? And I do like the idea, like, you see his person, but his face stays shadowed for most of his interactions with Niswata. And I'm like, oh, we still have an air of mystery. There's still some shit going on here. And it turns out he's going to, what he's going to get up to in here is slowly, dare I say, seductively. That might just be me reading.
No, that's definitely not just you. I liked it.
Yes,
No,
more hand stuff. He's like slowly pulling off his gloves and he's lulling Niswata into a daze with like his rich, beautiful voice. And as a quick aside, I do think it's a genius choice to like meet Gal properly for the first time in Niswata's POV. I really like this construction of the writing in the story.
Hard agree.
Yes, because we know she's ultra perceptive and a keen judge of character. She has been this entire time. So even in this horrible scenario, she isn't missing a thing with Galbatorix. She's really able to use like her worldly wiles, her like street smarts basically to size him up as this is happening. It's so good. He starts off in almost like a conciliatory tone, saying like, oh, I'm so sorry. I've been neglecting my honored guest. I'm so sorry. The voice is totally wrong.
Yeah, that's not
what
right
does he
at
say,
all.
Dane?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
But it's not long before he like makes a turn. He's mocking how young she looks. And that brings the claws right out of Niswata. And I love that she is not wilting in his presence. She's
going
like throwing it straight back at him. And as he continues his monologue to Niswata, he comes in hot, making direct reference to his hoard of Eldenari, like something that's a huge secret, obviously, and then revealing that he knows they have Glader's Eldenari as well. I straight up did not remember the fact that he already knows everything.
Yeah.
And I was so scared. He's so direct. He's so domineering about the whole thing. It gave me the goosebumps.
Yeah, he's creepy. And it's funny, because he's not in a lot of the series, even on rereads, you forget his characterization.
Yes.
So I feel like this hits every time.
Yes, I think that's so too, because I think after reading so many books, you're like, how is this all gonna work out?
Yeah.
And then when he is on screen, you're like, oh, it's working. It's working.
It's creepy.
So he continues on to give us a little history lesson about this room in the fortress that used to be the Elven capital. Apparently there are some like deep earth vapors that bleed into the atmosphere here that make you more likely to predict the future. And the elves discovered them thousands of years ago. So that's why Urobane's here.
Okay.
Period.
More drugs, apparently.
Yes, we love drugs in this section of this book. So for hundreds of years, an oracle lived in this room, seeing all of time and space. And the description Gal gives of this person is giving otherworldly. It's giving outside the bounds of this universe, Dane. It's giving Angela. We're always saying that like Angela's whole vibe is like all this whimsy. It's predicated on being apart from the story. And so on this read, the description of the Soothsayer really stuck out to me as hitting that same note. It was kind of the first time I picked up on like, oh, I could see.
Well, it is a very popular theory. And because Gal says it's not a human, dwarf, or elf, and I think people think Angela is something other than human.
Yeah.
I also think this just sounds like her in this description, right? The way this mystique is only heightened.
Yeah.
You know, and anyway, it also, Christopher Paolini kind of like ups the ante here because he refuses to really answer this question when it's asked.
Good for you, Chris.
He won't say one way or the other, which I think some people online take as yes. Like they take it as confirmation.
I think so.
And I myself am currently unconvinced.
Okay.
I don't think we have a lot of information here or information that says one way or the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, it very well could be. It would make it. Why not?
Yeah, with everything else, it
Yeah.
does make sense for her character. I think I like to think of it as in line with some of the things Christopher Paolini has said in interviews about like Doctor Who, the Time Lords. I know I brought this up on the
Yes.
last episode,
Yeah.
but like this makes so much sense to me as a whole part of that. Like maybe Angela is a Time Lord. Nerd on nerd on nerd on nerd.
I was like,
Dane.
Doctor Who is just a place I've not gone.
It's
You know
a
what I mean?
shame. You would like it.
I know.
Especially like the early episodes of the reboot. They're so campy. You
Yeah.
would love it.
I know.
But neither Niswada nor we have the time to dwell on Angela's origin story because Gal is barreling right along.
Yeah.
He's demanding nothing but the truth in his Hall of the Soothsayer, and he's getting in super close and like creepy
Ooh.
to talk to her like about destroying her entire identity to build her a new one. It's really building on my sense of ick the way he goes about saying how he's going to break her.
Yeah, it's gross.
He tells her he won't lie to her in his special room. That seems highly dubious to me, but whatever. And then he basically lays out the case for why he kidnapped her. He doesn't need any information from her. He's basically omniscient.
Yeah.
But she is a bigger threat to him than Eragon or the elves because she's a singularly competent, charismatic, and pragmatic leader. And he wants her to serve as a general in his coming like revolution that he keeps hinting at, like the way he's going to change the face of the world.
Yeah.
I hate this the way I'm supposed to from a story perspective. Obviously, this is bad. But can I just real quick... I'm so glad that Galbatorix is finally seeing Queen President as the vision of perfection that we're always wishing Eragon could see. Like,
Yeah.
somebody has to realize our girl is better than everybody else. And if that somebody is Gal, I will take it for the time being.
Game recognized game. You
I
know?
really think so, yes. But he's apparently planning to test Niswada. He says, like the way he tested Murtagh to see if she's fit for his service. She emphatically declines that gross little offer. And after another poetic exploration of Gal's plan to torture and break Queen President, our favorite emo teen gets his invite to this fucked up party, Dane.
Oh, Murtagh.
And I feel so bad for Murtagh
Yeah, me
here.
too. This is rough.
Galbatorix is clearly enjoying like trotting him out, taunting him about like the violence and misdeeds he's perpetrated. Niswada feels particularly betrayed by Murtagh joining in this tortury spectacle and kidnapping her, but your boy is completely at the mercy of the insane murder wizard.
Yeah.
We get Niswada's description of something that harkens straight back to the Eragon Sloane True Name episode. Immediately I was like, oh, this is that again. With the world going wonky for Niswada at the sound of a word she can't remember, after which Murtagh clearly struggles against what is this true name command to take one of the hot irons to start torturing her.
It's not great.
No, it's really, really, really bad. Yeah. She tries in vain to delay the inevitable by starting to like ask Gal why not just take control of my mind? You could do anything. And Galbatorix basically just says he doesn't feel like it right now.
For the love of the game, you know what I mean?
Literally is about like how he sums that up. And the chapter ends with Niswada's screams of pain echoing into the darkness. And this book is getting bleak, Dane.
It's getting
Jesus.
pretty bleak. But we are on chapter 44.
Better?
On the Wings of Dragons. And luckily, we're back with Saphira and Eragon.
Hey, everything's fine.
Yeah,
Everything's going to be fine.
We're out of the torture hellhole
It's
for the
coming up
time
roses
being.
for Eragon
Yeah.
and Saphira.
These two are flying, and Eragon reflects that he feels better getting away from leadership, war, and responsibility, but more importantly, violence.
I mean, same, dog.
Yeah,
Same.
we're all there, Eragon. Eragon thinks about how he's killed literally hundreds of people in these battles, and he's haunted by the unthinkable amount of violence he has perpetrated, even though he knows that it is necessary to win the war. And I think it's more the ease and butchery of it all that bothers him.
Yeah.
Total psychopath, am I right, Jackie?
Yes.
So he feels good being alone.
Okay.
It reminds me of when he was alone in the spine at the start of the first book, Eragon.
Yeah.
And the peace he finds in Elsmere and Eldest.
Yeah.
So I think Christopher Paolini has done a good job of characterizing Eragon that way throughout.
Yeah.
Heck, we even saw like his hate of public speaking, his like growing discomfort around the Carvalhaller villagers, and his
Okay.
apparent distaste for the cities he's been in and
Yeah.
like described as crowded and dirty every time.
Repeatedly. Well, and it's interesting too that Roran has a lot of the same thoughts. So you know
Yes.
this is something that like maybe isn't just Eragon having explored a lot of the world. This is something that like he was raised with.
Yeah, and I mean they were out like away, notably from Carvajal. They were like in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So I mean,
How
it
many
makes
miles
sense.
away from the main town, dude?
10 miles. I'm still upset about that. Anyway,
I know. I just tried to rile you.
but I do think that like Eragon is just like a country nature homebody.
Yeah.
He'd rather be home with his dog than like, among people.
Once again, same, Eragon. Same.
Anyway, Eragon thoroughly enjoys the journey, taking in the sights below as they fly over hamlets and villages and small homesteads. And he reflects on the people below. On one hand, there's the simplicity and the familiarity of life in a small town where you know the people around you and what they need, but little outside of the world, right? That's all you really know.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's a more metropolitan life where you have broader knowledge of the world, but perhaps lack the understanding of the people around you and the most basic needs.
Yeah, nobody in the city knows their neighbors, Dane. That's something a psycho does.
That's true. Eragon, it's funny how that works. Anyway, Eragon doesn't reach a conclusion on which is better, but this type of contemplation marks, I think, a significant change for our humble bean farmer who wanted to return home after avenging his father-uncle.
Yeah.
He's growing. It's happening.
I know. I liked the start of this journey for them, even though we're like, where you're going, where now? What?
Yeah, exactly.
But I think we're getting a lot of really good characterization throughout.
Eragon is seeming different in this book. Throughout this section, there are these really nice moments as Eragon passes over and recognizes familiar landmarks. Like there's a trail he once traveled with Brom and a patch of trees where they stopped to eat together.
R.I.P.
The whole
Magic
thing
Daddy.
evokes this sense of warmth and nostalgia that Paolini does a good job with.
Yeah.
And at some point, Glader tells Eragon and Saphira a beautiful, soothing bedtime story about the time he and Ormus were captured by the Forsworn.
Oh, that's
and how
not
they
fun.
escaped. Just a sweet little story.
I mean, it was fun though.
Yeah, it was fun. I'm
Good
glad we got
story.
this. We get the same setup that we have heard before. The Dragon Riders really weren't that concerned at first with Galbatorix.
Yes.
Confirming our discussion a few seasons back about the Dragon Riders like police and the possibility that they might have silently killed riders as the solution to like
You think
the
this is your like smoking gun for that?
Well, basically Glader says that Gal wasn't the first rider to go crazy, so I have to assume that since we haven't heard of those other riders, they were all quietly killed. Euthanasia.
Quietly disappeared. They got some CIA black sites out there somewhere.
Yes, we nailed it.
Amazing.
Anyway, I digress. He continues on about the blind spots of the riders, thinking it's only in hindsight that it seems obvious Galbatorix and Morzan were a danger.
Yeah.
At the time, it seemed impossible that sane, full-fledged riders would actually join up with them. Obviously, now we know that some joined out of spite, revenge, the belief that Dragon Riders should rule all, and finally the old classic, just liking murder.
Yeah, just a good smorgasbord of reasons for evil.
Yeah. Even with confusion and misinformation rampant, Ormus and Glader got a little spooked and tried to raise the alarm with leadership about this new threat, but the ancient riders had enjoyed peace too long and they were having none of it. So 2 other riders and dragons offered to take them to see what was going on for themselves.
Okay.
As it turns out, these riders were actually 2 elven Forsworn.
No, they got tricked.
Yeah, Garlindi and Formora.
Okay.
When they landed at a watchtower to camp for the night, the trap was already set.
Oh, no.
The tower guards had been murdered, and a spell had been prepped to spring as soon as Glader sat down on the tower, slowing him and Oramus like a slow spell in D&D.
Okay.
Which means it could only be like time for mind fighting. There wasn't really,
mind fight.
Mind fight. It was pretty even matchup, even with the traps and 4-on-2, since Ormus and Glader were so badass.
Hell yeah.
Our teachers ultimately, and technically it was 5-on-2. There was they also had a Eldenari, but we're getting into the weeds.
Not you.
Yeah. Our teachers ultimately escaped by accepting that they wouldn't be able to win the mind fight, so it was worth the risk of them all dying to try some magic. Ormus, because he is sick as fuck and the coolest dude ever, used a spell to teleport them.
Jesus.
It was only inches, but the way he did it seems really different, too,
Yeah.
than the way he taught Eragon and Brisingar. Glader says Ormus changed every cell in their bodies
So
and then
fun.
moved them just a smidge, all on instinct.
Wild.
Cool. Just fucking cool.
Yeah.
This broke all the enchantments that was binding them.
Okay.
But also...
'Cause they're essentially like different people now.
Yes, they were different. Yeah.
Wild.
But also loosed the spells the Forsworn had been holding during the mind fight. So then they attacked, right? Like, think Karn's final battle type situation.
Yeah.
The first spell bounced off their wards, but the second was a spell that Durza taught Gal designed to cut Ormus off from the source of magic.
Uh-oh.
This horrible spirit magic was a thing that hindered Ormus for the rest of his life.
Okay.
Because it mixed with the spell that teleported him. Basically, all of this was happening at the same time. So it probably changed him to the cellular level.
Yeah.
So he had bad signal after this. But I digress. It's a bummer.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Ormus was T-Mobile. With Ormus out, Glader just went Dragon Balls to the dragon fucking walls and attacked both riders and both dragons.
You love to see it.
Yes, I loved this because Glader just roasted the dragons for being small and ugly, which is just perfect dragon shit talk, I think. Long story short, Glader just fucking threw one of the riders at his dragon, and the dude got fucking impaled on his own dragon spikes.
What a fucking move, dude. Only a dragon would think of that shit.
So cool. Then he held the others off till Ormus woke up to get the hell out of here. And it was the ensuing chase that Glader lost his leg. But that was a blessing in disguise. As that little weight trimmed off, he was faster than the smaller dragon.
Oh my God.
And they were able to get away.
Amazing.
This was the moment that, they knew Gal was a real threat.
Okay.
And it really, sunk in for them.
Yeah.
So the Elinari was sent to Rowengard, and Glader, Ormus, Brahm, and Saphira, classic, left before Gal attacked what's now Urobang.
Gotcha.
So it's a good story. I was hooked. Eragon and Saphira were hooked. We all enjoyed it. Well done.
Yes.
Also very soothing before we go to bed.
You think?
They decide to land on the coast of Tyrm after the story's over, and Eragon decides to do sprints when they land.
Amazing.
Just trying to get some of that anxious energy out.
Yeah.
This made me laugh.
What do you mean anxious energy? He just heard the soothing bedtime story.
Yeah, that's weird how he's not just chilling. Not to be outdone by her rider's sprints, Saphira decides that even though she's a little tired, she wants to fly through the massive brewing storms straight across the ocean of Rowengard.
That's a bold choice, Cotton.
It's a bold choice. Of course, against Glader's insights, they decide to do the dangerous plan, which is fun. This is fun. We're all having fun. This chapter ends as they take off across the ocean. These two.
They're wild.
They're just
dude.
what could kill us? Let's do it.
It's fine. Isn't Glader also well, if you're going to just not listen to me and do it anyway, we better go now.
Yeah. He's there is a storm.
Better do it.
Yeah.
That takes us to chapter 45, the sound of his voice, the touch of his hand. This chapter has one of the horniest titles so far, I think. Hands down. I'm very unhappy to report that the subject matter is just...
It's not Bloodgarm and Arya?
It really is not.
It is Bloodgarm POV.
After all of this, Bloodgarm gets a POV and not Arya.
That would be hilarious.
That would be such a wild choice. No, Dane. Here it's just more torture. So Niswada is in the thick of it with Murtagh and Galbatorix, and her life has basically just become an unending cycle of pain and relief, underscored all the while by the dark allure of Gal's silver tongue. It's really one of the grossest aspects of this series yet, I think. Second maybe only to Elva. There's a lot going on here. After Niswada regains consciousness following her most recent bout with the Hot Irons, Gal starts talking about Ajahad's backstory and service to the Empire. And you remember his little dust up with Durza on his way to fuck
Durza had a mark
garden.
on his
Yeah. Ajahad left that mark on his blade for the rest of...
Sorry, I got excited about
the swords. Thanks, sword guy.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And apparently, it was Ajahad, after having been in service to the Empire and escaping like this, he was the one who taught Gal it's best to avoid dads when you're looking for servants. And that might be a lesson Eragon could stand to learn for his own inner circle, if only for the health and safety of all the dads out there.
Yeah, seriously.
But Galbatorix is not to be deterred. He's still demanding Niswada's fealty, and he pivots to arguing that the riders were the true evil all along to persuade her. I know you're going to get deep into whether we really buy that the world was stifled under the boot heel of its overpowered overlords. But for now, he adds just a little footnote that he and Niswada are not so different. And he says that if you take the view that the victors write the histories, isn't he really the good guy here?
I mean, is he wrong?
I think I'm with Niswada personally, because she responds that Galbatorix hasn't exactly ushered in an era of progress, so by his own logic, he deserves to be toppled just like the riders.
Look, we covered this in book 1. The government is not here to help everyone. It's not the government's job.
That's not why you pay taxes. And then Gal hints at something truly insidious other than that. Some sort of solution. I feel positive he thinks of it as a final one to account for the fundamental imbalance created by magicians just being loose out in the world here. And what follows is an absolute whopper. He insinuates that he's unearthed some ancient knowledge that will allow him him to bind every magic user in Alagasia to require his permission to perform any but the simplest of spells. Horrifying to contemplate, if true, because I can't imagine how we're going to pull off the W against a dude who can assert control over every magician. That's bad.
I'm starting to think he might be a bad guy.
Again, that is hearsay. Now that he's on screen, we just, getting a lot of confirmation about that, maybe.
We're getting some confirmation he might be the worst.
Yes. Yeah. I do like that in the course of this speech, Christopher Paolini shows former Queen President, thinking that even she has been plagued with the conundrum that magic presents in a society in this world. I think it's just such a good way to show how Galbatorix's persuasion works in real time, touching on kernels of truth and trying to worm his way in through there, because we've heard that this is his primary skill.
Yeah.
But Neswata sees the insatiable lust for power that's truly at the heart of all of this, and she calls Gal out on it, even firing back when he tries to pull a classic, like, the Varden have been the real villains all along on her.
They're terrorists.
Yes. And to her eternal credit, it seems like she manages to get the upper hand on him a little bit, because his only answer is to have Murtagh resume work with the irons. Like, Gal gets, like, frustrated. He's like, bring back the hot irons.
Oh, gosh.
And Neswata actually feels bad for our sweet emo baby, because she can see like the shame and rage that's like boiling in him having to take a part in all of this.
Yeah, she's right. He's really the real victim here, I would probably say.
Classic women just having empathy for everybody. It's just a perfect transition, I think, to the ending chunk of this chapter, which sees Neswata waking from another pain blackout, alone and thinking of Murtagh, because it turns out after the first torture sesh, so we get a little flashback, earlier in this section, Murtagh came back to the hall hours later, drunk, depressed, and ready to spill the tea. Dane.
God.
It's really peak emo with him, like, he like stares at Neswata and like slides down the wall to sit on the floor swigging from like an unmarked jug. I'm like, dude.
He's like, holding on. I'm 6 feet from the edge and I'm thinking. Just like playing in the background.
I think so, yeah. It's just truly wild. He's like ranting away at her basically. And I'm like, dude, do a little less, maybe. The main character energy with Murtagh is so strong.
So strong, dude.
And wouldn't you know it, his first drunken anecdote is about our favorite dude we never got to meet, Tornak.
Horseback!
No. The man Tornak.
Oh, okay.
That's just about the only levity here, because right after that, Murtagh confesses that he was the one who convinced Gal to abduct Neswata to keep him from having her assassinated.
Oh, God.
So it's a bit of a rock and a hard place choice, but Queen President says she would rather have died. Yeah, I kind of get that. Murtagh asks for forgiveness before launching into his tragic life story. It's wild. But on the whole, much as it pains me to report, Neswata is not sharing what usually is our sympathy for our sad boy. She thinks he's just having a little pity party. That's definitely how it reads. Until he gets to the part where those fucking twins brought him back to Urobane for torture and Gal used Thorn against him. At that part, Neswata is like, that was really sad. That's a bad
I love the
hand
idea
to be dealt.
That our evil boy is like complaining to someone who's like being tortured.
That he's torturing.
He's like, it's been so hard for me. And she's like, you're right, just hanging on her little slab.
It is pretty wild setup here. But Murtagh says that he swore his fealty to Galbatorix to protect his dragon. And every reminder we get of his plight makes me hope that Paolini is going to stop doing this shit to Murtagh, because it is fucking sad.
It is sad.
A hell of a time to bring it all up, but we'll see how it pans out for our guy.
Yeah.
So after Murtagh has himself a good cry, this dark chapter ends as he magically eases Neswata's pain, which is very nice. I think that's why she's like, since she's reflecting back on all of this after it's done, like, she's like, well, he is trying to be a good guy in certain ways. But like, as you're reading through it, you're like, dude, shut up.
Yeah, it's like, dude, she's the one captured and being tortured, man.
Yeah, but he magically like assuages some of her pain. And as he heads out of the hall, former Queen President leaves him with little comfort, saying she can't forgive him for torturing her, obviously, but she doesn't necessarily blame him. And I'm a little torn on this. Is she really the most evolved POW in all of time and space? Or do you think this is a ploy to like gain a foothold with somebody, kind of like she's been thinking about her jailer, like to try to escape?
I think it's got to be the second one, because I don't know if anyone has that much empathy in their heart.
Really hard to imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, if it were anybody, it would be best at everything all the time, Queen President. But the last line in the chapter is about her like finding a new ally. So that leans me towards calculated a little bit. But it is hard to say. I think both reads could be equally true here.
Well, let's see what happens, because we're in chapter 46, Small Rebellions.
Just little ones?
Just little ones. So we're still with Nasawada in this chapter, waking from pain and being cleaned by her portly butler, who keeps...
Butler?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is not a bad situation. She's in a beautiful elven cathedral, right? And there's a little butler there to help her, who keeps flashing her his nails.
Yes.
You know?
Now that she's mentioned them, he's like, you see those girls?
You see those?
You like them?
So the whole nail angle might be working.
Yeah.
Go Nasawada. Murtagh comes to heal her and then chills with Nasawada while Gal is with his favorite concubines. And that made me laugh. I was like, what? It turns out Gal is living it up. He's like...
I think you said something earlier about leaving the children's book part behind, and I think that's right. I think that's true.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, Nasawada wants to escape, but Murtagh explains that the city is full of magical traps, and it's totally within Gal's control.
That's bad.
Even her cell is triggered to alert Gal if a prisoner leaves. So he's not like into helping her out, but he
Defeatist a bit.
Yes. He does tell her that like he'll get her off this like slab and let her stretch a bit. So that's nice. They sit together and we learn about Tornak.
Tornak? The horse? Is he okay? I've been missing that old scoundrel for like 2.5 books, Dane.
No, Jax. The human man.
Oh. Why did they make it so confusing?
More of a father figure to Murtagh than anyone else.
Oh, that guy.
Yes.
I missed the horse.
Yeah.
We only ever knew the horse.
Yes, that's true. He also recounts Tornak's death again, and it's all very sad.
It's sad, Dane.
Yeah.
I don't want to be sad.
Well, we'll clip-clop right past that. We also finally figure out why Galbatorix went to Draciona in Book 1. It wasn't to fire Margus Tabor at all.
Well, that guy's so important. How could it not have been?
Yeah, the man we've always heard of, but just never meet. It was, in fact, to find out and to find Murtagh.
Oh.
Gal was coming to pick up his adopted son.
Oh.
But Murtagh had already left on his 2-for-1 hunt for the Razak and the new rider.
Okay.
Interesting little tidbit. I wonder why Gal would sent the Razak after them instead of just going after Eragon and Murtagh himself. That's the one where I feel like he could have tied this up all nicely right there.
I mean, I guess what we've seen set up for 4 straight books is Gal's not doing anything himself that he can get out of.
Yeah, he's like, I got concubines to get to. I'm
busy.
I'm also getting the feeling that Murtagh has fully embraced Galbatorix's vision at this point, believing that everything will be better once Gal wins the war. Even talking about a future where he and Eragon will be truly brothers finally.
It is interesting because he's like, wouldn't things be better? And it's like, for you. For
basically just him, maybe?
Yes.
I don't know. But Nasawada isn't buying this, waving her hot poker scars in his face and declaring that she would rather die than be a slave to Gal.
Good.
She doesn't hold back at all, pointing out that no matter what Murtagh does now, he will always be remembered as a villain in this war.
Yeah.
Which is just savage, Queen President.
She's ruthless, dude.
Dude, striking at core wounds.
Yes, for sure. Like I said, oh my God. She's a keen judge of character, Nasawada.
Yes. So Murtagh rage quits the hang at this point and puts her back on the stone, but not before he casts a spell that alleviates most of her pain from the wounds.
Okay.
And then he just heads out. It's a brutal scene. He's obviously torn and thinks he's trying to be a decent dude in a bad situation. I always imagine as he walks out that Torn is playing in this scene, but not the Natalie Imbruglia cover. The real actual version by N-Swat. With the album, it's on the album Wacko Magneto, which is way more Murtagh style. Just N-Swap Wacko Magneto. Torn.
You would be the kind of guy who's like, no. You know that amazing bop that everybody likes? That's actually a cover. And actually, I like the original version before it was cool.
I don't know. I just feel like it's okay. If you're a listener right now, listen to both the songs back to back. And then email us, which one do you think Murtagh would be listening to? I'm not wrong.
I'm sure you're not wrong. If you love it, That's a Murtagh song. That's a Murtagh jam for sure.
And then it just has a little bit of wine to it. Yeah.
That feels so right.
Yeah. And the next day, Nasawada is fresh from a painless sleep and feeling hopeful.
Good.
So she tries some trickery when her fat butler comes next.
Great.
Basically, she creates a distraction to cover the fact that she picks up a spoon.
Ooh.
Then she does some real spy shit using her own hair to make a cord that she uses.
Wild, yeah.
To tie around her leg. So the chapter ends now with the most, like, our Queen President having the most dangerous of weapons, a spoon.
Yes.
She's unforking believable.
Yes,
That's
former
the-
queen.
That's the scoop, everybody.
Oh, no. That does take us to chapter 47, A Crown of Ice and Snow. I finally get an Eragon and Saphira chapter. I'm very excited for a respite from the torture. But we're flying into that storm, blocking their path to Rowengard. And this is another oceanic horror on a scale that reminds me of the Odyssey, a la like the whirlpool Roran had to sail through, because the storm is gargantuan.
Huge.
And I think we need a good like local news meteorologist name for Glader, because his storm watch advice is like on point.
He nails it.
Yes, he guides Saphira like on a super specific path through the clouds and like through the wind currents, basically. And let's hope the incorporeal dragon got this one right.
And Glader Galestorm at 9 o'clock.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what I want.
I'm so proud of that right now.
Yes, 20 out of 10. On their flight, Eragon and Saphira both get a little curious about the ocean depths, but where Eragon, like, he's thinking about it and he's like, that's not for me. That's none of my business. Crevasses, hard pass.
Yeah.
Saphira takes a dive towards the water's surface because she wants to like do a little exploring before they're really in the thick of the storm. Yeah. She's trying to play a little bit in the water, which like is a little cute. She's splashing around, but I have to say I'm with Glader. He sounds the alarm to get her ass back in the air stat. She's just like floating out in endless waves. I'm like, that's enough for me to be like,
no, thank
get
you.
out.
Yeah.
But Glader actually warned her about something specific down in the abyss, because Eragon does a little open water stump time and discovers that a massive ancient creature from the deep is hurtling towards the surface to chomp them. So I know. So Saphira gets airborne and like rolls, does a barrel roll to get out of the clutches of a freaking sea monster's maw just in time. It's
wild.
Truly wild.
This scared me, actually, the first time I read it.
Me too, dude. Because I was
like,
already, I think I just don't, I obviously, very clear from everything I just said, don't like the idea of the open ocean. So like as soon as she landed, I was like, get out of here. Get out of here.
I don't think anyone does, because we're from Southern California and we both spent a lot of time at the beach.
Yeah.
And we're both lake people. Like we've spent a lot of time on like riverboats and stuff. And like,
there's something about like not seeing shore and just knowing intellectually how far you are from shore in any direction that like... Oof.
Yeah, it's creepy.
Yes. So once they're clear of whatever this horrible creature is that's swept from the depths, Glader gives them a little marine biology lesson.
Oh, yay.
Telling them that this thing is a needwall. It's a waterborne version of the fanger we saw back in Eldis, those like flying, screaming sidekick horror.
Yeah, the shrieking
things.
monsters.
Yes. They seem to be somewhere, also, he says, along the same evolutionary branch as both dragons and Fangher, these sea monsters.
Oh, weird.
But they're more similar to dragons, actually, because they are sentient and they do have some sort of like Eldenari analog in their chest. There's like some sort of stone in there.
Oh, cool. Underwater stories. I want mermaids.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Let's get me the pirate book, Chris. This is what I was spoiling.
Yeah, we spoil. I'm so sorry, everybody.
Light spoiler, I think. But I would love some piracy books to like dig into this a little bit. Glader does say it's really weird to see a need wall within a day's flight of the mainland. So this really got my like red string wall theory going, because I was like, do you think like Gal's whole coup like set off a series of environmental events that is having some like climate change adjacent effects on Alagasia? Like it looks like clearly here apex predators are losing their food supply, and like we also know that the elves have seen a decline in magic. Like certain things like that kind of put me in the mindset that like do they have global warming? Magical global warming?
This is a fantasy book. No, they do not. Yes. We're trying to get away from that, Jackie.
So true. But we have not the time anyway, because we're flying through a storm. And this is the first storm Saphira has had to navigate since the whole thunderstorm incident back on the plains after Yazawak nearly ripped off her little baby wings. Remember that?
I remember that.
Yes, it might have been nice to know she was a little rusty before they just went full send into this storm. But it does seem like she's gotten a lot better. But she for sure still needs Glader Gale. What was it? Glader Galestorm?
Galestorm.
Yes, she still needs Glader Galestorm's instruction if they're going to make it to Rowengard. It's a harrowing, turbulent flight, and as they head into the storm's center to stay on their course, Christopher Paolini describes the epic wall of like flashing clouds as the single largest thing Eragon has ever seen, and that includes the Beor Mountains. Like,
so cool.
It was wild. And you have to love Saphira here. This bitch flies straight into the wall with zero fear, only grit. She is such a badass. The storm is like nothing Eragon or Saphira has ever experienced. And the descriptions in this chapter I just thought were so fun. Like,
yeah, it's a fun chapter.
Yeah, per usual, our guy I feel like is killing it when it comes to like nature, landscapes, etc. Paolini is great at this.
Yes.
And they fly through the day being tossed around like profanity on this podcast. And Saphira's strength starts to wane as night falls. They end up being unable to resist an updraft that carries them what it sounds like is to space. Which is wild. Eragon,
ground control to Eragon. There's a title.
Precisely. Yes. 100%. Yes. Eragon. So like Glader helps Eragon cast like spells to keep them warm and like pressurize the air around them as they like gain this altitude precipitously. But when they're finally pushed above the storm clouds, they're entranced by the endless canopy of stars in the void and like the curvature of the earth they can see below them. It's shocking. And even Glader never thought he'd see such a sight. And they all get caught up for a while, like reevaluating how far they've come and like what a small space they occupy in such a vast universe. It's such a fun, like surrealist moment in an otherwise kind of like grueling travel chapter. But we need to get this little bean farmer back onto the mortal coil.
I love it. Bean farmer to space traveler.
Yes.
It's so weird.
Yes. I mean, isn't there like... I think there's some like absurd percentage of astronauts that come from Ohio.
Oh, that's right.
Like
Isn't
in
it most
NASA.
of them?
Yeah. So this feels like that to me.
Okay.
Maybe I could
maybe
get
this was in
behind
the cards all the whole time.
Yes. But they do have to finish flying through this storm. They're thankfully able, from how high they are, to just like glide over the rest of the worst section of storm. Like as they just, Saphira just clips the wings out and they make their slow descent, and the end of their flight passes pretty much without incident. So the chapter ends as Glader spots the ring of mountains that mark the island of Rowengard. They did it!
They did it! Well, that takes us to the last chapter
More
of this
fun?
episode.
More fun stuff?
It's gonna
Happy good stuff?
Well, I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
It's chapter 48, Burrow Grubs.
Mm-hmm. Fun.
It's not great.
It's bad. So bad.
This chapter cuts right into the action, back with Nasawada having killed her jailer, presumably with that spoon, which is just a nasty way to go. Although I guess for a man Paolini kind of kept harping on about being fat, we all knew the spoon was going to kill him one way or the other, if you take my meaning. I do want the whole scoop on that. You know what I mean? And it looks like Chris is here to give me what I want, because he gives us Nasawada's whole attempted escape scene.
Amazing.
Where she kills both of the guards at the door before getting caught and hauled back into her slab. But she's made it impressively far.
Yeah.
Seriously, if she was a rider, she would be unstoppable.
I think so.
Runen Elder would also be able to make her a blade, because it would be a spoon. The
so
spoon
it wouldn't
of
break her
justice.
oath.
Yes.
The spoon of justice is for sure Niswada's rider blade.
No edge of justice there.
No.
Just a circular sphere.
Yes, because it all comes full circle in the end,
Yes.
Dane.
And she... Yes. Wow. If you're still listening, thank you.
You hated that.
No, I love it. I don't know if everyone else is. Gal is not chill about this. He goes full on, you can't do anything unless I allow it.
Full on what?
You can't do anything unless I allow it.
Amazing.
Yes, and it felt kind of Darth Vader-like to me before he
Sounded Darth Vader-like too.
But of course, this isn't the only retribution our gal has in the story. The other shoe drops a little later when Murtagh and Galbatorix come back and bring a little surprise.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a giant maggot thing that we learn is a burrow grub.
Ugh, so gross. Had to get the laughs in where I could.
Yeah, it
this
gets
sucks.
pretty dark. Yeah, he pretty much drops it on her body, and it just does the most revolting thing. This creeped me the fuck out. It jumps around her body and makes a gross little chanting noise, which is yucky. Then, man, I yelped out loud when I read this next part. It dives into her body through the ditch in her elbow, splits into a bunch of teenier maggots, and chews itself inside of her.
I gotta get a handle on my.
Yeah.
I'm freaking out.
Yeah, this one
It's
finally gets to
so
Naswada.
gross.
She screams and cries while Galbatorix
Yes.
begins to laugh.
Ugh.
It's very gross.
Yeah.
Galbatorix is not a nice guy. Maybe some of the stuff people were saying about him might have been true. I don't know.
I'm kind of thinking so. What a shame. I was holding out hope for him.
I thought it was just his bad employees, but it turns out it was him all along. She wakes and looks at her body to see the tracks of purple bruises and rows where the grubs burrowed in her.
Trax is horrifying.
Yeah, she begins to freak out about the possibility of burrow grubs still inside of her, or even worse, their eggs waiting to dormantly hatch randomly inside of her.
Oh God. If you watch these on YouTube, please count for me the number of times the section has given me the full body shivers. I just can't do it.
Murtagh visits and does console her.
That's nice.
He tells her that there's no burrow grubs in her anymore. Yeah, which I would have to, which I would say would make me feel better too.
Yes.
He also heals her a bit, so she's not in pain. We finally also learned something about Murtagh's Eldenari. All of his they're all young dragons that really don't know enough to be helpful. So Galbatorix just gave a bunch of little dragon eggs, little dragon Eldenari.
Yeah, so they're not they don't have the ancient wisdom.
No,
of
the writers
dragon
didn't
race.
really live very long, so they don't have a lot of info.
So rude.
Yeah, he chills.
He is a bad boss.
He's a bad boss. He chills with Nasawada for a bit. Fun hang, I'm sure.
Yeah, I bet they're having a ball.
Yeah, Torn's playing in the background. And there's this moment where Murtagh puts his hand out to touch her shoulder.
Yeah.
And she flinches, but then when she sees how that reaction hurts Murtagh, she allows him to touch her. And it was strange.
Yes.
How did you feel about that?
You know, as soon as you mentioned it, I was like, oh, yeah, I had some feelings about that.
Yeah.
I feel like my first reaction was just a hint of righteous feminine outrage, because I know I've been in situations where I haven't been proud to let somebody, especially a man, push my boundaries in small ways like this, because I feel like the way women are so conditioned to appease people and be agreeable is so pervasive. I have a hard time not reading it through that lens, you know, that we're much happier, or it's so much easier for us to just go along to get along,
it's
which
kind of the
fucking sucks.
It's kind of the vibe I was getting.
Yeah, but at the same time, I do know how people, especially in high stress and traumatic situations, can need physical human connection. That is well documented, well researched.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like I do have a definitive answer necessarily. Maybe allowing this at first is not great. When she the way she notices the reaction and lets it in. But then as you read, the comfort that she was able to draw from it seems harmless enough, admittedly her point of view.
Yeah.
But this dude is torturing her with hot pokers, so we're right back to square one. I just really can't get a final
that's
read on it. I think
that's kind of what I was sensing too. I had the same visceral reaction. It just seemed odd. It seemed, I don't know, but
well, and there's something about it too that were it written by a woman, I might have a little bit of a different perspective too, because I think there can be, especially when this was written in 2011, these weren't a lot of conversations we were having at the time.
Right.
And it would seem reasonable to me that this is not something Christopher Paolini is seeing as he's writing
this is
you know?
This is pre-Me Too.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah,
I would be really, really, really impressed if this is something he noticed while he was writing, because it just wasn't the norm back then, I think, in a lot of ways.
I don't think...
Unfortunately.
I just don't know. Well, I can say they embrace and cry together after this.
Do that, yes.
Yeah. Murtagh explains that he thinks he can get her out of all this, but she has to be ready because Gal is going to change up his tactics by starting to alter her reality.
Okay.
Then Murtagh touches her mind, and Nasawada's description of what he feels like is wild.
Yeah.
She says his mind feels like Eragon's a little, which makes some type of sense to me. They're both writers, and if the elves all have a magical music thing going on, I can see the writers having their own signature feel too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I read that and thought because they're related.
Oh, no. I mean, maybe.
Your thing is better. Your thing is better. But I was like, oh, because they're like brothers.
The more interesting thing here is the anger in Murtagh.
Yes.
She says that it, quote, lay at the center of his being like a cold black heart. This
yes.
emo boy is so emo.
So emo with a capital E.
Yes. So in preparation for this episode, I was thinking way too hard when ruminating about what Murtagh's mind music might have been. Yeah.
No.
And I landed on Wolf Chant by Comet, but also discovered a whole genre of music called German epic pagan death metal.
Dane.
And I am now obsessed. So this series is a really gift that keeps on giving for me. And no joke,
Only
this
you,
morning
dude.
at the gym, that's what they played. For real. In real life.
You got your whole gym into German epic pagan death metal.
Yes, it was dope.
And what's the song called?
It's called Wolf Chant. Because, of course, it's called Wolf Chant. Yeah, it was so dope.
You and Murtagh are so similar.
It was so cool. After this, Murtagh says he'll try to telepathically warn her before Gal tries to fuck with her mind.
Yes.
And hopefully he won't have time to do this too much because Gal should have his hands full with the Varden and the elves only 3 days away from the capital.
Okay.
Murtagh then asks why Nasawada did so much murder, on a doomed plan when she tried to explain.
Yeah.
And she explains that she could not try.
Yeah.
And Murtagh says he likes this because he understands pettiness, which this gives me real evil vibes. He's like, yes, let the hatred burn deep inside of you.
Wasn't he positioning this like, this doesn't make any sense. You were never going to make it out. Like,
Yes.
what could possibly have been your reason? And he was like, good. I was hoping it was pettiness. And I'm like, I too can enjoy some pettiness, Murtagh. Maybe not like this, but
He's like, I get that. I could rage against the machine. You know what I mean?
it did make me laugh. I did chuckle a little bit at that for Murtagh.
They chat for a bit, and one of our reoccurring off-screen characters pops up again.
Amazing.
Lord Barst.
Oh,
He's
that guy.
the chill Empire commander who drowned his horses in Gilead when the elves came and killed the men who rebelled when he tried to recruit more troops for Gal. Apparently, he is now commanding the army inside the capital.
Okay.
Which Nasawada is understandably, I think, a little bit worried about.
Yeah, he's definitely got a mythos around him, that guy.
Yes, and the characters with myth in this tend to be scary.
Yes.
This chapter ends with Nasawada asking Murtagh to kill her if he can't get her out of there.
Dude.
It's very badass, but it's also very sad.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of respect for her. Her dignity is dope here, and she doesn't want to be a mind slave for evil. It's the very thing Eragon asks Murtagh to do for himself.
That's such a good
and
point.
the good of the world that
Yeah.
Murtagh really didn't like.
Yes.
Nasawada,
he was notably pissed about that.
Yeah, he resented that a little bit. Nasawada
He took that personally, Dave.
yeah, exactly. Nasawada is stronger and much less selfish than
Yes.
Murtagh. They talk a little bit longer, but it's pretty much just them getting to know each other.
Okay.
There is this romantic ending to the scene where Nasawada asks him why he's helping her, and Murtagh just says, "You know why." You know why. I don't know. Well, I don't know. There's, you know why. You get it. It's very.
I definitely get
there's a lot of tensions of love. You know.
He's just so much.
You got to give Murtagh cool points. This man knows how to deliver a line.
Yeah, that's true.
Unlike Eragon, notably, and that is the gross chapters this episode.
Dude, that last Murtagh line totally gave me flashbacks just like on reading it to like some of the top tier flirting we read in the Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches.
Yes.
Like the flirting in that book, just like, ooh, okay.
It gives some Jamie.
Yes, except for it is truly more opposite of a circumstance than I could conceivably imagine from that book. So I don't really know, but it does make me crave a little bit of cozy romance to soothe my soul and a cup of tea. Or maybe that's just my subconscious like backlash to all the torture porn we just read.
That's fair.
But there's no escape for Nasawada, so there's no escape for us, Dane. The only way out is through this analysis.
Yeah.
It's time for analysis.
So I want to start off with a little confession. I think all the imprisonment and abuse in this set of chapters really overshadows anything else that might be going on in this section for me.
Just a little bit.
Yes, it is so at odds with Eragon's like harrowing flight, and I'm so fixated on the horrors being perpetrated on one of my favorite characters. I had some trouble coming up with a theme for this section, but I'm hoping I'm actually able to like fail up a little bit on this one, because I think that by just leaning into what's pulling my focus here, we can really dig into something that we actually mention all the time on this podcast, kind of in passing though. So these Niswata chapters, and this is true, Dane, are icky.
Yeah, they're gross.
Like really icky. And it got me thinking about how often we've said shit like, Chris is really nailing the creepy vibe here on this podcast. Probably enough to give someone like alcohol poisoning if it were a series-long drinking game, which for legal reasons I cannot recommend.
Also, there's someone who disagrees with us who every time we say it's like, ugh.
Again, it's not that good. And I'm like, you're wrong.
Yeah.
It's incredible. But for something we bring up so often, I feel like we haven't like really picked apart what makes him so good at this.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the focus of this analysis segment. So I want to start with a bit of a trivial distinction. While I think that some of the things in this series can definitely be scary, the descriptor we seem to be drawn to most prevalently, I noticed, is creepy. I'm obviously into specificity. I have no other way to be. So I thought it would be good to make clear from the jump that I'm not really talking about Christopher Paolini as like a textbook horror author. Think less like screaming and running in terror from the things in this series, more the feeling of like unease, prickling the hairs on the back of your neck.
Okay.
Like to elicit that involuntary shudder from both of us that we do so often, along with like a big chunk of our fellow fans, I'm sure. I think we can confidently say that Paolini is an author with a deep understanding of some like primal human fears.
Yes.
Fears with roots that trace back to like our earliest myths and stories. And you really can't throw a stone in this series without hitting an example of this, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot.
From the second episode of season 1 until just 2 episodes ago, we've been singularly creeped out by our boogie boys, the Razak. As evil creatures, they play on so many primal fears, I think, like monsters, obviously, bugs, specifically giant ones, and like the shadows in the night. They have all of that going for them, and they never fail to set our teeth on edge, I think, even though they've been effectively genocided since the beginning of the last book. Still, every time we think of them, you know, we're like, ooh, uh-oh.
They're gross.
Yes, and I kind of read the foulness of the Burrow Grubs as like a spiritual successor to the Razak. And at least for me, it totally hits the second time around. I mean, you could tell how much I hate that as we read that section.
And when we were doing it, you were just like, I hate
Why is this happening?
Yeah.
And like, love to hate it, I guess is a better way to put that.
Yeah. You hated the weirdness of it all.
Yes. Yeah. Brissinger also had the pleasure of introducing us to a new ick in The Laughing Dead. Not my deepest read here, Dane, warning up front, but I think those guys tap into our instinctual fear of dead people. It's simple, sure, but like no less effective because of it for me.
Yeah.
At least one of Roran's like close quarters combats with the Laughing Dead makes the list of things that like really sticks with me between reads for sure. And for a person with a really shitty memory, I feel like that's saying something that like gets to me. And of course, we can't wrap up this list without mentioning Elva. We've talked so much throughout this series about how uncomfortable the very idea of her makes us, how uncomfortable, how dark it is to consider the implications of her in this book. And I think that stems from a couple of pretty universal fears, one of them being like possessed children. Remember the changelings, Dane? Like that whole thing I think is a little bit wrapped up in Elva and just like her creepy aesthetic. But I think when we talk about the implications, that fear it's drawing on is the fear of unfixable mistakes, like the things that are going to literally haunt us for the rest of our lives. And like Christopher Paolini gets it.
Yes.
So if tapping into those fears is why this works so reliable for Paolini, I think the how of it all deserves a shout too. And it happens to be another thing that we've referenced a few times, I think, in passing. It usually comes up in happier scenes, but it works the same way here. And it's Christopher Paolini's like descriptive style of prose. We've said his descriptions of scenery and landscapes, even like the storm in this section, make us want to live in Alagasia. It's what makes so many readers like want to dive into this world. And I think that same skill at sketching an evocative scene works for him when it comes to drawing us in and just like creeping us the hell out.
Totally, yeah.
And before I get any more goosebumps myself, I want to wrap up with one more quick, hopefully, thought on this. Free stickers for anyone who guessed it was going to come back to coming of age. The more I thought, though, about this like elite creep factor Paolini gives us, I realized it's like a fundamentally emotional pursuit to play on fear in this way. And a coming of age story is also a fundamentally emotional pursuit based on your connection to childhood. And in a weird way, I was like, I think I was really in the Matrix at this point, but I was like, don't those things kind of go hand in hand? Like, I can't imagine that's just me. Like, think of this like like a chicken or egg question I kind of get when reading this book or this series. Do you think that like being in that nostalgic, emotional headspace as we watch Eragon grow up and like find himself, do you think that amps up the things that are creepy? Or do you think that all these like viscerally creepy aspects of Paolini's world help to strengthen the parallels to being young and out of your depth in a world that's full of mysteries, basically things to be scared of?
I think
you know?
Could be. I mean, it depends on the reader, I think, right?
Yeah, either or, both and.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just telling that I was like kind of a scared child a lot of the time. But I think that like feels so true to childhood when you're just like, what could be out there? I maybe don't know anything.
Yeah.
And even reading this, like we've talked about, this last book came out when we were young adults. I think that still like hits home in that phase of your life too, because you're like, oh, are they just going to let me loose out here on the world?
Dude, I remember the first time I was teaching and they were just like, all right, well, see you later.
Go on.
Just like students. And I was like, wait a minute.
Yes. Yes. The coming of age never really stops, I think.
Yeah, totally true.
I'm done though for now, Dane, with these deep-seated fears.
Oh.
Tell me you have something nice for us in a deep dive in this section.
Deep dive.
For this week's deep dive, I want to explore the time we spent with Galbatorix in this section, specifically his revelations about the ancient order of riders and his supposed reasons for destroying them.
Into the mind of a psycho.
Yeah, seriously. His argument is compelling on its surface, even though we all know these weren't Galbatorix's real motives.
Yes.
He is most certainly an insane, psychopathic wizard king.
Right.
So,
right.
however,
Remember,
even knowing that, I do think we learned some interesting information, and I am tempted to believe most of it because we all know that the best liars use truth. So I dug for that truth in my deep dive research this week, going back through the first 3 books, and I started noticing hints for some of the things Gal implies scattered throughout the series. It's like Paolini was dropping crumbs for a lot of these concepts throughout that we had already read, and they have some pretty hefty implications.
Okay.
What struck me as a new thought this time around was that Christopher Paolini clearly wanted us to see the writers as the good guys.
Yes.
And that's why Eragon never really grapples with any of the implications head on that we get. They're all implied by other characters. They are not spelled out by him. So let's
not that this read you just picked up on the writers are supposed to be the good guys. It's like this new way you've noticed Christopher Paolini is portraying that fact.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I was like, what?
You're like, wait a minute, what? I've heard you ramble on. So let's start by breaking down Gal's argument that the writers needed to be brought low. First, he explains that the writers hindered societal progress by withholding scientific and technological advancements, as effectively keeping the world in a state of stagnation. From the time their reign began, thousands of years earlier. The writers hoarded knowledge and prevented the world from advancing, fearing the consequences of what lesser people might do with that information. As Gal puts it in this section, they feared what might happen if those things became generally known. And I buy into this for 2 reasons. First, First, we have seen through Eragon's training with Ormus that the writers kept both magical and non-magical secrets, such as the Eldenari and pulling magical energy from external sources. This concept of withholding information or locking everyone in a state of stagnation also makes a certain type of intuitive sense. In our world's history, major scientific breakthroughs often come out of wartime necessity, the development of destructive weapons, and morally questionable, if not like outright evil experiments.
Yeah, you hate to think about why we have the internet.
Exactly. All of which the writers would have prohibited from happening.
Yeah.
Also, the time of the writers has been kind of described as a utopia, and utopia is by nature stagnant. So I believe this first argument has a lot of truth in it.
If it's perfect, why is it going to change?
Yeah, supported by some of the other things we've read in the book to this point. Gal goes on to explain, and stay with me here because we're about to go on a ride, that the writers were an unfair order built upon racial superiority through their natural connections to magic. He's implying more than he's saying here, but it makes a lot of sense when you consider what we know about the creation of the Dragon Bond and how it affected the elves and humans.
Yes, Red String Dane.
Yes.
Pull the threads, feel them.
First he states, quote, "While the writers existed, we were dependent upon their goodwill. and it is not right that we should have to rely on others for our safekeeping. The riders began as a means to keep the peace between the elves and dragons, but in the end, their main purpose became upholding the rule of law throughout the land. Then he specifically singles out the elves, who obviously created the riders, when they talk about like magicians and stuff. And he tells Naswada, quote, "The elves find it easier than us to maintain order within their society, for most every elf can use magic. But it is not fortunate for us, for the dwarves, or for the accursed Urgles. We have only been able to live here in Algasia because the elves permit it." And what I'm reading between the lines is that the opposite is also true. That the elves could have, that the elves, with their abundance of magic, allowed the existence of other races in Algasia, but could have exterminated them all. Since he's saying this in the same conversation that is discussing the writer's hypocrisy and tyranny, I think it's safe to infer he would suggest the writers had their power to an even greater level. And this is borne out to some degree in the fear we sense by many characters in the series. Roran, Nasawada, the dwarfs, the Urgles, or, of the magic users and the elves.
So true.
From Eragon's interaction with Hrothgar in Book 1, we understand how our dwarf daddy viewed the Dragon Riders and their power. He seemed to appreciate the peace they instilled, but seemed to dislike their meddlesome nature. We can infer, the writer's power to control and destroy is also the primary reason he adopted Eragon into his clan. He wanted to protect the dwarfs.
He's our dad.
It's true. In Book 3, Nargashbra explains to Eragon during their Hot Boy summer trip that the Urgles need to befriend the new Dragon Rider and his allies to avoid their race's destruction. He flat out says that the riders would come and kill them if he fails to make this alliance, if they don't get on board. In addition, the very nature of the Dragon Bond itself supports this whole idea, as it would only involved the elf and human races. This does create an inherent power imbalance, especially considering that most of the oldest riders were elves. So putting this all together, we have three interesting points that Gal is making to Nasawada here that I think are proven true by a close read of the series to this point. First, the writers feared losing their power and destroying the utopia that they created, leading them to withhold both scientific and magical knowledge from the people of Algasia. 2, the writers were not representative of all the people of Algasia, which led to mistrust and a natural lack of access to power for the races that were excluded. Third, magicians as a whole, but sticking with the writer focus here, instilled fear due to their overwhelming power, ensuring obedience from the others in Algasia. This is all very interesting to me. Again, I want to note that this is being delivered in the worst possible way, as Galbatorix is literally torturing someone. Also, it presents an overly cynical view of the writers, especially because it assumes that people would trade peace for scientific advancement and change. I'm not sure that's true, especially in a magical society. It also assumes that racial injustice were intentional. The racial injustice here were intentionally chosen to be done, which does not change the systemic imbalance created, but would cast the ancient writers' motivations and aims in the most sinister possible light. So to wrap this deep dive up, we know as a reader that none of these arguments are the reason why Gal overthrew the writers. He lost his dragon and his freaking mind with it, but that he makes the case to Nasawada is super fascinating because it's really our first look at how good Galbatorix is at understanding his enemies and manipulating them. Especially because Nasawada actually believes that access to magic creates an imbalance and knows that magicians are a real governing problem here.
That's such a good point. And I feel like it makes me think that Christopher Paolini made a super, super clever choice in the way he structured the rollout, basically, of Galbatorix's argument, because he gets going early on when he meets Naswada, from her POV, and his line of reasoning feels uncomfortably close, like you're saying, to some truths about the writers that she knows and we can grasp from what's in the rest of the series. And then right in the middle of that section, we cut over to Eragon and Saphira hearing a story from Glader that shows us the unhinged brutality of Galbatorix's coup, those early stages. It's enough to know he's crazy and probably lying. You didn't have to flash back, but it's so smart to actually show us the rage and evil he and his followers harness to bring down the riders. I think it's such a cool writing choice.
It's really cool, and it goes a long way in making good old Gal seem less one-dimensional, more competent, and a lot closer to how Murtagh described him in the first book as a greasy little snake. So
Yes.
it ups his like villain street cred significantly.
Yeah.
So I think I chalked this whole thing up as a pretty solid villain move while also providing a new angle on a lot of the subtext in the series so far. And man, I got lost in the sauce on this one, but I had a good time.
I always love when I see you with a roll of red string getting ready to write some of these deep dives. But I do think it's such a good, like, you're so right. He's not just one-dimensional evil. He's not just cut and dried, black and white. And it's so scary to contemplate somebody who has the worst intentions and is very good at accomplishing things.
Yes, totally.
I hate to see it.
Yeah, but it's a fun time. It's a good time to read.
Yeah.
But you know who never has a good time?
Who doesn't have a good time?
The haters! It's time for What Are the Haters Saying?
Actually, you should do your research, huh? Have you even read it? How you pronounce it?
What are the haters saying?
There is an index in the back, right?
this is a really derivative.
Copycat.
This week, we all knew what the haters were going to be upset about. The torture, the weird murder, and for sure the Burrow Grubs.
Yes.
So much to choose from, and yet not what we'll be focusing on at all this week.
Amazing.
Yeah, I want to focus on a romance that I think most fans very much ship, and surprisingly, so do the haters.
What?
I am, of course, talking about Murtagh and Nasawada, and I want to talk about this precisely because it is where my beloved haters got me good by not hating this, and that's a first on this podcast.
Yes.
Also, spoiler alert. It doesn't work so well for me. I don't hate it.
Yeah.
But I'm not super convinced.
Okay.
And I even think it might undermine one of my favorite characters.
Oh.
So let's break it down. First, let's just remind everyone how this all started in book 1.
Okay.
Murtagh and Nasawada hit it off when Murtagh was a prisoner of the Varden.
Right.
Nasawada spends time visiting Murtagh,
Yes.
and later in that book, Murtagh tells Eragon essentially that she's a hottie and makes the chicks in the Empire look frumpy.
That's right. He's like, all those hoes at court
Yeah.
got nothing on Queen President.
Exactly. From there, we jump to this book, and more importantly, this section where it's clear they have emotions for each other.
Yes.
So let's start with some positives. I think what people like about Nasawada and Murtagh is the similarity in the darker, more complex sides of them.
Okay.
Nasawada is tough, smart, competent. She's also a bit tragic.
Yeah.
Her father, King Daddy, died in the second book.
R.I.P.
She bravely endured self-mutilation that left her bandaged for 2 books.
Yes.
And now in this book, she's being tortured by the man she clearly has complicated feelings for.
Yeah, pretty bad.
Murtagh is also tough, smart, competent, and even more tragic.
Of course.
Yeah, he has been enslaved and forced to fight with Galbatorix, and his future is just fucked. I mean,
Yeah.
regardless of the war's outcome, he'll always be hated by the Dwarfs for killing Dwarf Daddy,
Yes.
and for the Elves for the death of Glader and Zen Daddy.
So
Oramus.
many dead dads in that paragraph,
I
Dane.
know.
Jesus.
Let's not forget that Nasawada is a queen president.
Former
and-
queen president.
Exactly. And Murtagh is a second-generation writer and noble in the Empire's court.
Okay.
They are close to the same class level, I would say. Close enough, at least.
Yes.
Finally, both characters have a paternal legacy connection.
Okay.
Nasawada's is positive, but she is still likely to compare herself to her father's stewardship of the Varden.
Yes.
Murtagh's connection is negative, as we know he fears that he will be prejudged by strangers harshly due to his father's brutality.
Yes.
Nothing bonds people together like daddy issues, especially when those daddies are famous.
Oh my God.
So I would say a relationship between them could make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Additionally, there seems to be some solid setup with Murtagh's opinion in the first book.
Yeah.
We know Murtagh, at the very least, finds Nasawada attractive and capable.
Yes.
And we can infer that Nasawada must have some feelings back after this section of text.
Yes.
So that's probably the reason everyone likes them together. There is fan fiction, fan art, there's relationship, like their relationship has been a topic Paolini has been asked about more than a few times.
Yeah.
So why, Dane, are you talking about this? Well, now that we have covered the positives, I want to explain why I was expecting the haters to be against this whole situationship.
Yeah. They gotcha.
First, I think Christopher Paolini struggled with how to bring this romance up more in the series.
Okay.
After all, they don't meet until the end of book 1.
Yeah.
And immediately after, Murtagh is thought dead until the end of book 2.
So true.
Then Murtagh's barely on screen in book 3.
Yeah.
And while he's in much of this book, it is for the most part as opposition to the Varden in combat and, torturing Nasawada. So I can see how it was challenging to create enough space for a relationship to really have like a strong build-up.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a solution for that.
Okay.
Second, let's be real here. Force or not, Murtagh is torturing Nasawada.
Yes.
Force or not, Murtagh kills her troops. Force or not, Murtagh and his dragon kidnap her.
Pretty bad.
And he tells her that that last one was his idea.
It was a bold move on his part, I think.
Yeah, these are kind of like huge trauma points.
Yes.
that intentional or not, I don't think can realistically be forgotten or forgiven.
Yeah.
Also, if it works, it's giving kind of like a nasty Stockholm syndrome thing. It's not a great vibe.
Yeah.
Third, what would this look like down the road? If he can survive this whole war thing without being eternally subjugated by the insane evil dude, or just murdered by the opposition,
Yeah.
Murtagh is going to live forever. Nasawada, on the other hand, would be a slave.
Yeah.
Which would mean she's with him, I guess, but it doesn't seem particularly romantic.
No.
Or if the Varden somehow win, first Murtagh would have to survive. And it would still be a disaster for Nasawada to be in a relationship with him. I mean, the dwarves, elves, and even the humans are all going to hate him. How does this work for her and her work in politics?
Yeah.
Which leads to the final thing I assumed the haters were going to bring up, which is that a romance between these two would only take away from both of these characters. Instead of a romance, it could have been cool if in these chapters Murtagh was helping Nasawada because he wanted to rebel against Gal.
Yeah.
And that, like, she's Gal's greatest foe. But that's not really what's up.
Yeah.
Right? And then, or instead of a romance, we could have had Nasawada manipulating our emo boy, honing her skills as a political player. These motivations and actions would have totally fit, and they would have elevated the characters.
Yeah.
So then I got thinking, I was like, how am I so off base? Like,
Yes.
And I think it might have to do with the time period and the intended audience of this series. First, the audience for this book is young adults. So as a 35-year-old, so it makes sense to put romance in, like, just when teens are waking up to their hormones and the idea of relationships.
Yeah.
So giving those fans something to root for is a good move.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That makes sense.
The second piece here is the time. I don't think in the early aughts anyone was worried about backlash for making every male and female interaction romantic.
Yes.
I think this makes it a story of its time. And with a modern lens, it takes away from the characters to couch all of these interactions in romantic motivations, especially when torture is a factor. I think it runs into the cliche where any tension between a male and female character has to boil down to love or lust. And I think a lot of readers now want more individuality and complexity with their characters.
Yeah.
So haters and fans, I have to say, you have both surprised me today in believing in love. This was the thing that brought you all together, and I think that's a podcast first.
Damn.
You're all fucking wrong, but
Jesus.
It's a podcast first for sure. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, the haters didn't hate, the fans loved, and together love was made
Love
ever stronger.
Wins. That is truly wild. I guess, like, for me, I don't hate Murtagh and Nasawada together.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, I think, hit the same. I think when I first read this, like you said, for its time and its place, I would read a lot of books or watch movies, you know, whatever the form of story is. I'm always kind of rooting for a love story. I'm just like basic bitch, kind of into a rom-com. Like, that's where my head's going to go. That's why it's always notable when I bring up, like, I was not into Eragon and Arya. That seems so weird for me at the time. But this one, I really was like, okay, cool. Yeah, they're hot. Get them together. But it is interesting. I feel like maybe it has something to do with growing up, maturing. You're taking this read on it that, like, the whole middle section of that argument is basically like, well, now how are these crazy kids going to make it in the real world? Like, you have some real relationship experience, I think, that undermines how realistic any of this is.
Yeah,
I
I think, you know, it's funny. I never really had a problem with it until I got older.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. I think it's just like, it doesn't make much sense. You know what I mean? Now as an adult,
like,
I'm like, how would it work? I mean,
a lot of people can't deal with, like, disagreeing about the dishes for 10 straight years.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to get over torture and being on opposing sides of a war?
I mean, he killed Nighthawks, like people she presumably knew well. You know what I mean? It's just like, I don't really understand how that's supposed to work. But I do think you're right. And I do think the truth here is that teens read this book. This was for teens. Teens are, that's what they want. That's what they're thinking about. That's what, I mean, they are the most basic of bitches.
Yes, admittedly. I get it. I also love, just before we go out, notable to mention, I love that this really shows you as the kind of person who will construct an entire argument in your head before you've, like, come to the table to fight with somebody. You're like, haters, I knew what you were going to say.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, actually,
I'm the same exact way. I just think it's so funny.
Well, also revealing a little bit too, like, I try to think about what the hate will be.
Yes, that's what
And then I go to try to find it, and then sometimes I'm wrong. Like, sometimes it's not there, right?
Yeah.
Then I go and, like, look for the hate, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? I'm surprised. But yeah, a lot of times I'm like, oh, I know what it's going to be this week. I was so wrong.
Yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
there's a reason we often will disagree about things for hours and hours and hours because both of us are like, I thought you were going to say that, and I have my point ready.
I've prepared it.
Yes.
Well, we can go argue off podcast now.
Yes.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Make sure to rate and review on Apple Podcasts to be entered into our merch giveaway. And don't forget, you're only entered if you confirm with an email to isthisjustfantasypod@gmail.com. It's the same place you can hit us up with questions, feedback, and recommendations for other books to cover on the show.
Yes. And if you want to keep pace and read along with us, on the next episode, we'll be covering chapter 49, Amid the Ruins, through chapter 57, Return.
Or is this just
Forking back.
fantasy? We're just two nerds and we love our fantasy. Come on and listen to us next time. Find out what our deep dive will be. Thanks for catching our show.
Oh, sir, you're early for your appointment. Come on in. I was ready for you. I only wait for you to show up.
Yeah, well, of course.
You are my only client.
Of course.
Well, come on in, sir. Would you like the fire lit today, or...
Yes. Just let me lay down. It's been such a hard day. People talk about how painful and horrible torture is. No one never asks the guy behind the torturing how he's doing. You know what I mean?
Sir, you know what I mean? That really does hit to my core. I know I'm not supposed to be invested, but we are best friends.
Yeah, I know. I don't know about that, but...
Sorry, you're right. I'm the therapist today.
Why are you making this all about you?
You're so right. Say more about that, sir, please.
Everyone's always making this about you. You know, I've saved the world. I'm killing Urgles. I'm killing dragons. Today I led my adopted son.
That's so nice. Did you guys spend that quality time together we've been talking about?
Yes, I took him to do something that I think is my favorite thing to do.
Oh, sir, that is perfect execution of our plan. You're growing.
You know what he said to me?
What?
He said grouse.
What?
Who doesn't like Burrow grub torture?
The fucking goal! Oh, I'm sorry. How did that make you feel?
I feel sad. Well, I don't really feel anything, actually. I'm being really honest to you. I mostly go through the motions, but I got a bit of rage in me. So it's what we've been working on.
Yes. Say more about that. It seems like you want to drill down into that a little bit more, sir.
You're right, and that's why I brought my drill. Come here!